Well, hello, bonjour. I'm Paula with Volunteer Canada, and let me begin by acknowledging that the land on which I live, work, and volunteer is the traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. It is with a mixture of anguish and hope that I express my gratitude for all that I have received from this land, and I am committed to understanding how I can contribute to both truth and reconciliation by addressing our past with an open heart and an open mind. You may know that the Volunteer Center Council has established a working group on truth and reconciliation, and we'll be learning and sharing all that is on our own journey individually and collectively. Volunteer Canada has also established a working group, the Board of Directors, a working group with staff and community members on inclusion. And we know that colonialism, oppression, white supremacy, and systemic racism have also caused harm to many people in Canada and around the world. May we support and accompany each other on our individual and shared journeys towards a society built on justice, respect, equality, and harmony, so that we all may thrive and prosper in our diverse and connected communities and nations. Thank you and welcome to our webinar, Volunteering Counts, Formal and Informal Contributions of Canadians in 2018, which is a wonderful article written by Tara from Statistics Canada. And we are really pleased to be collaborating with Statistics Canada on this webinar. Welcome everyone. If you haven't already introduced yourself, please do so in the chat. For those of you who don't know Volunteer Canada, we provide national leadership and expertise on volunteering to enhance the participation, quality, and diversity of volunteer experiences to build strong and connected communities. And we work with over 200 local volunteer centers around the country and many others. So with that, I want to turn it over to Patrick Fournier-Savard from Statistics Canada and our colleague Tara Hanman, who will give you an overview of the wonderful article, Volunteering Counts, Formal and Informal Volunteering. And as you listen to the introductory words, we have a short poll just to get a sense of your familiarity with the statistics and what you're interested in terms of the general social survey of giving, volunteering, and participating. You'll see the poll in front of your screen, and in a moment you'll be able to quickly answer. But over to you, Patrick, for some introductory remarks.
Okay. Bonjour tout le monde, and thank you, Paula and Deborah. It's always a pleasure to work with your team at Volunteer Canada. Thank you also once again for organizing this joint event to share the most recent GSS-GVP results that were released during the last National Volunteering Week. First, let me introduce my two colleagues from StatCan. Tara, as you said, author of the publication that we're presenting today, and Valérie Duplessis, senior analyst involved in the GVP survey since its very beginning in the GSS program. Before giving the floor to Tara, I would like to take a few moments to give you a little bit about the background on the journey that led us to this publication. It's been an adventure that began in summer, fall 2016 with extensive consultations of organizations from the nonprofit sector, government departments, and academics. In total, just a little bit less than 200 representatives. A second phase was also led with the GVP Steering Committee, which Volunteer Canada has been a part of since inception. So during these consultations, of course, several issues were raised, new themes were proposed, but a large majority quickly came to an understanding. It was that volunteering, like society generally, was changing. And clearly, citizens engage in various ways. And of course, formal volunteering played a crucial role, but it was now an imperative to better measure its informal dimension. Another observation that came out of these consultation periods is that there were changes on the international side of things, more precisely an international definition of volunteering that was adopted at the 19th International Conference of Labor Statisticians. And as a national statistical agency, StatCan needed to adhere to it. To this journey, we must also add the challenge of converting to an online survey, which in the past was administered exclusively via telephone interviewers. This might have been a simple detail for other surveys, but it was different for GVP, where the assistance of interviewers played an obvious role in the recollection of volunteering and donating events and details. In short, significant redesign work took place for the 2018 survey. After that, data collection, processing, analysis followed their course until, as you know, the pandemic. The nonprofit sector has taken a hard hit, a tsunami, not only for workers, but also for beneficiaries. Several organizations have adapted their ways of doing things to ensure their mission, or in some cases to survive. But at the same time, personal initiatives came more and more visible and evident, in particular, or for example, by depositing provisions and other items for others, preparing meals, making masks, sharing information on electronic platforms. And it is, among other things, by this unfortunate coincidence that GSS-GVP's data are more relevant than ever by having extended and further developed the measures of informal volunteering with its latest iteration. The publication Formal and Informal Contributions of Canadians in 2018 allows for a more inclusive understanding of volunteering as a whole. And like Tara will probably repeat in a few moments, yes, this data was collected prior to the pandemic, but serves as benchmark and insight that can potentially help the sector in the future to understand the impact on volunteering. The presentation is in English, but the French PowerPoint version of it is available, and questions and comments can be addressed at all time in both languages. So without further ado, Tara, I'll leave the floor to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for attending today. I'll be presenting on a recent release entitled Volunteering Counts, Formal and Informal Contributions of Canadians in 2018. As said, I'm an analyst at StatsCan. I also want to thank Volunteer Canada for organizing this webinar, and my colleagues, Patrick Fournier-Savard and Valerie Duplessis, for all their assistance with the publication and the presentation today. So I guess we can start on the next slide. So the outline here is, I guess, a bit of a roadmap. I'll start by providing some contextual information prior to diving into some of the findings on formal volunteering and then informal volunteering, which is broken up into helping others directly and improving the community. I'll go on then to discuss total volunteer participation, and then looking at a generational sort of distribution and a provincial distribution, followed by some concluding remarks. We can go to the next slide. So today I'll present on data from the General Social Survey on giving, volunteering, and participating. At StatsCan, data collection on volunteering began in 1997. For this cycle, data collection took place between September 4th and December 28th of 2018. Again, this is pre-pandemic. The target population included all persons 15 years of age and older living in the 10 provinces. The 2018 GSS-GVP offered an internet option to survey respondents, as Patrick described, for the first time to reduce the demands on time. It's therefore not appropriate to compare results from this cycle with that of previous cycles. And these data, again, are pre-COVID-19, but provide important baseline information. The findings from the study can shape how the volunteer sector responds to ongoing restrictions and the reopening of the economy, including approaches to age-specific recruitment, retention, and reentry campaigns. If we can move on. So this is the first cycle of the General Social Survey on Giving, Volunteering, and Participating, where information can be reported on the distinction between hours of informal and formal volunteering. Informal volunteering distinguished by direct help and community improvement through activities not done on behalf of an organization or group. And the question on mandatory volunteering in the context of formal volunteering was extended to all volunteer hours. In 2013, the question on mandatory hours was not only asked of organizations where the respondent volunteered the most hours. In 2018, it was asked in reference to all volunteer hours. So this is a change. And then we can also report on the number of volunteering hours supported by employers, which is new. And then also new to this cycle is international definition of volunteering, which is different from that used in this analysis, as it excludes activities that are mandatory or required or supported by an employer and direct help given to relatives living outside the household. Furthermore, the international definition only includes volunteer activities of at least 1 hour. So that's a bit of a distinction. So as you all know, I'm sure here, the definition of volunteering. Volunteerism is the participation in purposeful, helpful activities without monetary compensation. It can involve a variety of activities taking place occasionally over the course of a year or more consistent and sustained commitment. Volunteering benefits groups, persons, community, and can either be mediated by an organization or not. So this article took a generational focus. While there are no ideal types in terms of generational cohorts, the following specifications were used after consulting with our demography division. So as shown, baby boomers make up the largest proportion in 2018 at 30%. So as stated here, the youngest cohort is referred to hereafter as iGen, and the oldest as matures, with 5 generations, as you can see, in total. So the following few slides report on formal volunteering, regardless of whether informal volunteering activities were also undertaken during the reference period. So formal volunteers are those persons aged 15 and older who did any activities without pay or on behalf of a group or organization at least once in the 12 months preceding the survey. This includes unpaid help provided to schools, religious organizations, sports or community associations, to name a few. 12.7 million Canadians engaged in formal volunteering, and that is 41% of Canadians dedicated roughly 1.6 billion hours in 2018. Formal volunteering decreased with age, as we can see here, although hours volunteered were highest among the oldest generations. In particular, while iGens had the highest volunteer rate, the average hours volunteered were the lowest among all generations at 82 hours in 2018. Conversely, matures logged the most average hours at 222 and had the lowest volunteer rate at 32%. Baby boomers contributed the most total volunteer hours, equivalent to nearly 300,000 full-time year-round job equivalents. So baby boomers and matures were more likely than iGens to be top volunteers as well. And top volunteers are the 25% of volunteers who provide the most hours, spending 132 hours or more on volunteer activities in 2018. So we also examined, additionally, mandatory volunteering, which is required unpaid activity by a school, an employer, a court, or another organization. And mandatory unpaid work expressed as a percentage of total formal volunteer hours was highest among iGen, which is something probably people would anticipate, but it still made up a fairly small proportion of the total formal hours contributed by iGens at 10%, which was an interesting finding.
Okay, we're going to just stop for a moment and get a sense of whether this, with another poll, whether this resonates with you. We'll leave that slide up. And if you want to answer the poll, or if you have any comments about whether the statistics that Tara just shared about formal volunteering resonate with you, either put a comment in the chat or answer the poll. And we'll see what folks are saying. All right, thank you. Here you go. It resonates with most folks. Some folks need to learn more, and some have different experiences. And if you've had different experiences, we'd like to hear more about that. Thank you, Tara. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So on to the next slide. So when examining formal volunteering now by gender specifically, we found that women were more likely than men to participate in formal volunteering. The gender differences was mainly driven by millennials and baby boomers, as we can see in this table, and no significant differences were found for the other generations. We can move on to the next. So the survey asked about motivations for volunteering, and improving job opportunities was cited as a top reason for volunteering among iGens at 38%, which is not unsurprising. Not surprisingly, career-oriented volunteering was less common among generations with generally more experience in the labor force. So reflecting the early stage skill development, a lower proportion of iGens reported skill use as the important reason for volunteering compared to some of the older generations like millennials, Gen X, and baby boomers. So contributing to the well-being of the community was named as a leading motivation among about a quarter of volunteers, with notable exceptions of iGens, where 13% mentioned this as a reason for volunteering. And iGens were also less likely than other generations to say that a desire to support a political, environmental, or social cause led them to volunteer. So this was less of a motivating factor. And this compares with some of the older generations that had sort of a higher percentage reporting this as a motivation. Spiritual or religious-based motivations were most often cited by baby boomers. So the charitable and nonprofit organizations benefiting from the dedication of volunteers are varied. However, the average number of hours volunteered, the average number of volunteer hours were highest among hospitals, religious organizations, sports and recreation, and arts and culture, as we can see in this chart. In comparison, formal volunteers gave about half as many hours to the 4 sectors at the bottom of this chart, including education and research, health-related services such as crisis intervention, outpatient clinics, and rehabilitation services. So the types of volunteer activities vary somewhat by generation. Compared to all other generations, iGens were more likely to organize, supervise, or coordinate activities or events, as well as to teach or mentor. Joining the iGens were millennials and Gen X's, and coaching, refereeing, or officiating. About 1 in 10 individuals in these generations engage in these activities. This compares to 3% of baby boomers and 1% of matures. So baby boomers were more likely than the youngest generation to sit on a committee or a board, as well as to provide driving services, such as driving adults with disabilities from a medical appointment. And no generational differences were found for volunteering activities such as collecting, serving or delivering food, counseling, or providing advice, maintenance or repair, conservation or environmental protection, as we can see in this chart specifically. So moving on to informal volunteering now. So this refers again to help given by those aged 15 and older on one's own, so not on behalf of an organization, the 12 months preceding the survey. It includes direct giving, which is help given to friends, neighbors, relatives, but it excludes help given to persons living in one's household. So these activities may include health-related, personal care support, teaching or coaching, help with paperwork or shopping. It also includes activities done to improve the community directly through activities that are not on behalf of an organization, such as maintaining a public space. And you can see this breakdown or this distinction in the table. So 23 million Canadians engaged in informal volunteering, regardless if formal volunteering activities were carried out during this reference period. And 74% of Canadians dedicated 3.4 billion hours, which is close to double the rate in hours for formal volunteering. So when generational differences were explored, few were found, although iGen had a higher informal volunteering rate than the older two generations. And just as is the case with formal volunteering, the older generations dedicated more hours versus the youngest generation. 62% of all hours given to help others directly went to tasks for relatives outside the household. And this was actually highest among baby boomers at 71%. So helping others directly includes help given to friends, as I said, neighbors and relatives, but it excludes help given to persons in one's household. Again, with several types of activities outlined in the chart to the right. iGen was more likely to help others by teaching, coaching, or tutoring. Matures were less likely than other generations to help others directly with almost all tasks, such as housework, health-related or personal care, shopping, teaching, coaching. An older generation gave the most hours of support on average to health-related or personal care activities, while less likely to engage in those activity types. Matures dedicated the most average hours to teaching, coaching, or tutoring at 74 hours, nearly 4 times higher than the average annual hours reported by iGen.
Okay, we're going to stop for another poll, but not a poll where you click, but answer in the chat if you're so inspired. And as you can see, this valuable information about informal volunteering, many people are embracing the wonderful generosity that Canadians have formally and informally, but sometimes people are a little concerned. And so what are your predictions in terms of formal and informal? So do you think informal volunteering will keep increasing and formal volunteering will eventually fade out? Do you think informal and formal volunteering will even out and coexist? Or do you think many initiatives that are now informal volunteering will eventually become more structured and become formal volunteering? So we're curious to hear what your predictions are, and our wonderful challenge as communities, as a sector, how do we embrace it all? How do we celebrate it all? How do we support it all? Because as the title of the article indicates, it all counts. So take a few minutes if you want to share your thoughts, your predictions, and then we'll move on. Well, thank you, and continue your thoughts as we continue the presentation. Oh, more formal. Will informal take over? Questions about sustainability of informal? All right, as I said, keep your comments and questions coming. And Tara, why don't you continue?
Yeah,
lots for us to think about.
Yes, definitely. Thanks for everyone's input. Very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So moving on from the one categorization of informal to the other now, so improving community directly. So this is basically help given, again, not on behalf of an organization or a group that's assisting the community. The most frequently reported informal volunteering activities in this categorization included disseminating information, to make others aware of an issue, actively participating in public meetings where there was a discussion of community affairs. Generations differed in types of informal volunteering undertaken. So younger generations, namely iGens and millennials, were more likely than baby boomers and matures to disseminate information online or elsewhere and to raise awareness of an issue. Conversely, matures and baby boomers were more likely than iGen to participate in public meetings in which there was a discussion of community affairs. Matures were less likely to maintain a park or public space, plant trees, or repair public facilities, or to coordinate an event. Across all informal volunteering activities, there was no generational differences in the average annual number of volunteer hours contributed. So Canadians can participate in a variety of volunteering types across various types, again, like it could be formal volunteering exclusively, informal volunteering exclusively, or a blend of both. For the first time with this survey cycle, we are able to classify volunteers into these mutually exclusive categories. Previously, it was not possible to understand or quantify the possible overlap in volunteer types. So in 2018, over 24 million people or Canadians volunteered, accounting for 79% of Canadians, and they devoted roughly 5 billion hours to their volunteer activities. In 2018, most Canadians engaged in informal volunteering only at 38%, while compared to all other volunteering types. The next most common was a mix of formal and informal volunteering, reported by 35% of Canadians. And very few Canadians exclusively gave their time to formal volunteering activities. Overall, volunteering tends to decrease from younger to older generations, as we can see here on the charts. So younger generations were more likely to engage in a variety of volunteering types. So when examining now sort of regional differences in accordance with this, this more comprehensive look on volunteering, in 2018, the participation rate in formal volunteering activities was highest in Saskatchewan at 55% and lowest in Quebec at 33%. Saskatchewan also had the highest participation rate in informal volunteering activities. It's 81% compared to 71% in Quebec. In Quebec, 44% of the population 15 years and older engage in informal volunteering activities exclusively, the highest proportion of all provinces. And so the new ability to examine volunteering across types has provided a more complex picture, or sort of more complete picture, of overall volunteering. Due to a relatively large participation in informal volunteering on behalf of Quebec, differences in overall volunteer participation rates were relatively small between Quebec and other provinces. So for example, the difference was 2 percentage points between Ontario and Quebec when accounting for various types of volunteering, which really sort of narrows the amount of differentiation between various provinces. So in sum, using the 2018 GSS-GVP, we provided a generational focus describing differences between the 5 generational cohorts, with generally higher participation rates among the younger generations, while older generations generally contributed more hours. This is important to note, as top volunteers, as I described, are typically among the older generations, who especially during the early days of the pandemic may have had to curb their involvement due to the risk of severe infection. So sectors typically benefiting from volunteers such as hospitals, sports and recreation, along with arts and culture, significantly reduce their activities and have to continue to do so. This offers some insight into the challenges certain sectors might be experiencing. And this is the first time, as I said, informal volunteering hours are reported, providing a picture of engagement across a spectrum of volunteering types. And we found that, again, overall volunteering increased from older to younger generations, and that provincial differences narrowed when factoring overall volunteering. And while these data are predate the pandemic, as both Patrick and I have said, they provide a reference point that may help the volunteer sector following the pandemic. Indeed, knowing the pre-pandemic generational characteristics of volunteering can help tailor volunteer recruitment now and during the economic restart. I want to thank you all for your time, and this is a link here for the actual full article if anyone wants to read the entire article. So I want to thank you for your time.
Thank you, Tara. And again, thank you, Patrick and Valerie. You're so open to the sector's interests and input, and in particular, including this module on informal volunteering was something that I know many of you on this webinar and others had raised as an issue, and you were really willing to think about it and find out about it and include it. So I think this is just wonderful to see the results. We're going to go now into breakout rooms for about 20 minutes. So there are 11 breakout rooms. You'll be in small groups. Your groups will basically be self-facilitated. So as a suggestion, if your first name begins with either name begins with an F, maybe volunteer to facilitate the group, although as I said, I think they'll be self-facilitated. And if your first and last name begins with an R, perhaps you're willing to take down a few notes so that when we come back in 20 minutes, you can just informally share a few highlights in the chat. No formal reporting is necessary. All right, here are the 11 groups. And I'll give you a minute to look at them, and you will see at the bottom of your screen in a couple of minutes, there is, you see the icon with 4 squares, which says breakout rooms. You can click onto that and choose the room, but here is the full text of the breakout rooms right now. Hi everyone, I see that you're coming back. If you want to start preparing anything you want to share, please start. I know we only have a couple of minutes. Hi, welcome back. If you want to start sharing any of the highlights, please do. We're going to record them, so we'll be able to share back in some way. And here we are. Okay. Oh, we need more time. What a great conversation. I agree. So welcome back, everyone. This was just the beginning of the conversation. We plan at Volunteer Canada, along with Statistics Canada, to hopefully have many more opportunities in large groups and small groups to make sense of the data and to really share with one another what are the implications, what can we do with it, what does it tell us about how we work in communities, with communities, through organizations and outside of organizations. I totally agree, the time was short. So I invite you to share any highlights with one another, but also know that we will be convening and hosting more opportunities. Either your local volunteer centers will be doing that or Volunteer Canada. I know the Corporate Community Engagement Council also intends to do some convening around these data. And we will keep people informed of the opportunities to talk more about it, to make sense of it, and to be creative in how we respond. And while we have a few minutes, I just again want to really express my appreciation to Statistics Canada. This work is fantastic. The survey itself is fantastic. The article was wonderful. Thank you, Tara, Patrick, and Valerie, and the whole team at Statistics Canada. And thank my colleagues at Volunteer Canada. And Patrick, Valerie, and Tara, do you have any final thoughts before we close?
Well, I just want to thank you for allowing me to present today, and it was a really engaging conversation, chatting with people in the groups. So yeah, thank you so much.
All right. Well, till next time, everybody, thank you so much. And again, thank you all for your time. And this is only the beginning of a great conversation. Bye, everyone.